The SPAD S.VII was the first of a series of highly successful biplane fighter aircraft produced by Société Pour L'Aviation as Dérivés during the First World War. Like its successors, the S.VII was renowned as a sturdy and rugged aircraft with good climbing and diving characteristics. It was also a stable gun platform, although pilots used the more maneuverable Nieuport fighters found it heavy on the controls. It was flown by a number of the famous aces, such as France's Guynemer, Italy's Francesco Baracca, and Australia's Alexander Pentland. Design and development. Origin's performance in early aircraft designs was largely dependent on engines. In February 1915, Swiss designer Marc Burckhardt had created an overhead cam aviation power plant based on his Hispano-Suiza V8 automobile engine, resulting in a 330 pounds engine capable of producing 140 horsepower at 1,400 revolutions per minute. Further refinement of the engine brought the power to 150 horsepower by July 1915. Given the engine's potential, French officials ordered that production be set up as soon as possible and called upon aircraft designers to create a new high-performance fighter around the engine, called the Hispano-Suiza 8A. Luis Becerro, chief designer of the SPAD company, quickly produced drawings for a prototype fighter equipped with a new engine. The SPAD V was basically a smaller version of the SPAD S, a two-seat pulpit fighter. Although as a single-seater it dispensed with the so-called pulpit, which carried the observer in front of the propeller. Design. One of many common design feature between the new SPAD V and the S.A.II was the use of a single-bay biplane wing with additional light struts mounted mid-bay at the point of junction of the flying and landing wires. This design simplified rigging and reduced flying wire vibration, reducing drag. The fuselage was of the standard construction for the time, consisting of a wooden frame covered with fabric, while the forward part was covered with metal sheeting. A 303 Vickers machine gun was installed above the engine, synchronized to fire through the propeller. The prototype was also fitted with a large spinner, to be abandoned later. SPAD test pilot Baracca flew to the SPAD V for the first time in April 1916. Flight testing revealed excellent maximum speed and climb rate. The airframe's sound construction also enabled remarkable diving performance. In comparison, the Nieuport's esquiplane fighters that equipped the large part of the fighter units could occasionally shed its lower wings in a steep power-on dive, a result of the single-spar lower wing design. The combination of high speed and good diving ability promised to give Allied pilots the initiative to engage or leave combat. If the new fighter was a rugged and stable shooting platform, some pilots regretted its lack of maneuverability, especially when compared to lighter types such as the Nieuport 17. In the face of such performance, an initial production contract was made on 10 May 1916, calling for 268 machines, to be designated SPAD S.VII. Early production aircraft suffered from a number of defects which took some time to solve and limited the delivery rate to units. While a few SPADs arrived to frontline units as early as August 1916, large numbers would only begin to appear in the first months of 1917. Among the problems encountered were problems with the Hispano-Suiza engine. In hot weather, the engine was prone to overheating. In cold weather, the engine would not warm up. Various field modifications were used to counter the problem, including cutting extra holes in the metal sheeting to provide more airflow over the engine. On the production lines, the cowling opening was first enlarged and eventually redesigned with vertical shutters to solve both problems. The engine mount also proved too weak and reinforcements were designed to counter that. Early production aircraft also had two ammunition drums, one for normal rounds and the other for empty ones. This system was prone to jamming and was only solved when disintegrating ammo links were introduced. With the initial teething problems solved, several subcontractors began producing the SPAD S.VII under license in order to supply frontline units with the fighter. The subcontractors were the firms Graymont, Genois, Kellner et Fils, de Marque, Société d'études aéronautiques, R.E. Acute GY and Summer. It was not, however, until February 1917 that the initial batch of 268 aircraft was delivered. In early 1917, an improved version of the engine developing 180 horsepower, the Hispano-Suiza ATAB, was made available. This new power plant provided the SPAD S.VII with even better performance, the top speed increasing from 192 km/h to 208 km/h. The new engine gradually became the standard power plant for the SPAD S.VII, and by April 1917, all newly produced aircraft were equipped with it. Variants and experiments. Numerous experiments were made with new equipment or engines in the hope of further improving the SPAD VII's performance. A Renault V8 150 horsepower power plant was tested but required some major redesign, and the resulting performance was not considered worthwhile. A supercharged Hispano-Suiza engine was also tested, and also failed to improve performance by any significant degree. Different wing profiles appear to have been tested but were not incorporated in production models. One field modification was applied in Czechoslovakia after the war, when the undercarriage struts of one S.VII were faired over in an attempt to reduce drag to increase maximum speed. Very early in the development of the S.VII, the British RFC in RNAS had shown an interest in the new fighter. An initial order for 30 aircraft was made, but difficulties in early production were such that the delivery rate was very low, production being barely enough for French units alone. As the RFC was encountering an increasing opposition over the front, measures were taken to set up production of the S.VII in the United Kingdom. Blériot and AMP SPAD Aircraft Works and MAN Edgerton and AMP Co. Limited were supplied with plans and sample aircraft and ordered to initiate production as soon as possible. The first British-built S.VII was flown and tested in April 1917, and the first aircraft was reported to have performance equal to that of French models. There were, however, differences between the two types. The British were worried about the light armament of the S.VII. Most German fighters were now carrying two guns, and experiments were made to fit an extra machine gun on the S.VII. One aircraft was fitted with a Lewis machine gun on the top wing and tested at Martlesham Heath in May 1917, while frontline units also made field modifications with Foster mounts as used on the S.E.5. The resulting drop in performance was considered too drastic for the installation to become standard, and most SPAD S.VIIs continued to fly with a single Vickers. Other distinguishing features of the British-built S.VIIs included a gun fairing and a solid cowling access panel. The gun fairing partially covered the gun and extended rearwards, replacing the windshield. This, however, seriously limited pilot vision to the front, and, although retained on training aircraft, it was ordered removed on aircraft destined for frontline units in France. The bulged engine access panel located under the exhaust pipe on British models was made of a solid sheet of metal, in place of the louvered panel fitted on French production models. Some British SPADs were also fitted with small spinners on the prop hub. It quickly became apparent that the British production lines of the S.VII had lower quality standards than the French counterparts, resulting in aircraft with degraded performances and handling, poor fabric sewing, fragile tail skids and radiators of insufficient effectiveness plagued the British SPADs. Photographic evidence shows that a number of British SPADs had the cylinder banks fairings, or even the entire upper engine cowling, cut out to compensate for the ill-functioning radiators. Most British SVIs were used for training purposes, frontline units being equipped with French-built models. After some 220 aircraft had been produced, British production of the S.VII was halted in favour of better British types that were becoming available. In a similar fashion, Russia produced approximately 100 SVIs under license in 1917 at the Dugs factory in Moscow, with engines supplied by France. It would appear the engines were often used and/or of lower quality, and that Dugs used lower-grade material in building the airframes. This combination of extra weight and weaker power plant resulted in aircraft with significantly reduced performance. The total number of aircraft produced seems uncertain, sources varying from 3,825 to some 5,600 SPAD S.VIs built in France, 220 in the United Kingdom and approximately 100 in Russia. The SPAD S.VII began as a development of the S.VII, equipped with a 37mm cannon. However, it underwent a major redesign and was a distinct type rather than a variant of the S.VII. The S.VII can be distinguished from both the S.XII and the later and larger S.XIII by having unraked cabane struts, connecting the top wing to the fuselage, as well as differences in armament. Operational history. France. The French aviation militaire had been sufficiently impressed by the performance of the SPAD V prototype to order a batch of 268 aircraft on the 10th of May 1916. However, teething problems soon appeared and it would be several months before the SPAD S.VII would serve in significant numbers on the front, the last aircraft of the initial batch only being delivered in February 1917. In spite of these delays, some aircraft were delivered to frontline units as early as August 1916, complementing the Nieuport fighters. By this date, the Nieuport 11 that had ended the infamous Fokker Scourge episode had been largely replaced by later types such as the Nieuport 17, but these were now being bested by a new generation of German fighters by the second half of 1916 that threatened to give Germany mastery of the skies again. At the same time, the rotary engines that had powered most Allied fighters until then were proving difficult to scale further, while the heavier inline engines were steadily getting more powerful. In this context, it was hoped the new Hispano-Suiza 8-powered SPAD S.VII would be able to fight the latest German fighters on better terms. The first aircraft delivered to a frontline unit was S-112 flown by Lt. Sauvage of N-65, followed by S-113, assigned to Georges Guynemer of N-3. Guynemer was already credited with 15 victories at the time, but it was Armand Pinsard of N-26 who was the first to score an aerial victory on the 26th of August. The introduction of the SPAD S.VII was not enough to change the balance of the air war, but it allowed both pilots and mechanics to familiarize themselves with the new fighter. Many pilots found the SPAD lacked maneuverability, and some even returned to the nimbler Nieuports. New tactics based on speed were developed to take advantage of the SPAD's power, and to compensate for its lack of maneuverability. The aircraft's capacity to dive safely up to 400 km per hour permitted the pilot to break from combat when the situation demanded it. With early problems solved and production shared between several manufacturers. The SPAD S.VII was finally available in large numbers at the front in early 1917. By mid-1917, some 500 were in frontline service, having largely replaced the Nieuport. It gained a reputation for being stronger than its predecessors. Its principal shortcoming was its one machine gun armament at a time when the opposing Albatros D-3 fighters were equipped with two. The SPAD S.VII was gradually replaced by the improved SPAD S.13 in frontline units but remained in use as a trainer aircraft with aviation militaire throughout the war, and it remained as the standard pilot certification test aircraft until 1928. Foreign service Allied air services were also equipped with the new fighter. The Royal Flying Corps was the first foreign service to receive the SPAD S.VII, although only 2 squadrons used it on the Western Front. In addition, fighter schools in the United Kingdom and 30 Squadron in Mesopotamia also received SPADs. British-built SPADs were generally used in the training units and in the Middle East, while fighting units in France used superior French-built models. The SPAD S.VII was replaced by the Sopwith Dolphin in 19 Squadron in January 1918 with No. 23 Squadron in April. Russia received a batch of 43 in spring 1917, which were supplemented by approximately 100 SPAD S.VII manufactured by the Dux factory under license. Another early user of the SPAD S.VII was Germany. Several were captured intact and were reportedly used both in combat and for training. Rudolf Windisch of Jasta 66 flew a SPAD S.VII in combat with German markings, although it is not known if any aerial victories were achieved. Belgium equipped the 5E escadrille with the S.VII. Edmund Thieffry was probably the most famous Belgian pilot to fly the type, most other aces preferring the Henriette HD-1. Italy began using the SPAD S.VII in March 1917, where 9 squadriglia were equipped with it. As was the case in other air services, pilots accustomed to more maneuverable mounts disliked the new fighter, and again some reverted to the Nieuport 27 of the Henriette HD-1, which eventually became the standard Italian fighter. Francesco Baracca, Italy's leading ace, was delighted with the new model, and his personal aircraft is preserved in Italy. When the United States entered the war in 1917, an order for 189 SPAD VIIs was placed for the United States Army Air Service of the American Expeditionary Force. The first aircraft were delivered in December 1917. Most were used as advanced trainers to prepare the American pilots for the SPAD 13. After the war, surplus SPAD VIIs were used into the late 1920s by numerous countries, including Brazil, Czechoslovakia, Finland, Greece, Japan, the Netherlands, Peru, Poland, Portugal, Romania, Siam, the United States and Yugoslavia. Operators: Argentina, Belgium, Aviation Militaire Belge 5Mi Escadrille de Chasse, Groupe de Chasse 10Mi Escadrille de Chasse. Brazil, Brazilian Air Force. Brazil, Chile, Chilean Air Force. Czechoslovakia, Estonia, Estonian Air Force, post-war. Finland, Finnish Air Force, post-war. France, Aéronautique Militaire Lafayette Escadrille, Aéronautique Navale. Greece, Hellenic Air Force. Kingdom of Italy, Corpo Aeronautico Militare. Regia Aeronautica, post-war. Japan, Netherlands, Peru, Poland, Polish Air Force. Portugal, Portuguese Air Force. Romania, Royal Romanian Air Force. Russian Empire, Imperial Russian Air Service. Serbia, Soviet Union, Soviet Air Force, post-war. Siam, Royal Thai Air Force. Ukraine, United Kingdom, Royal Air Force. Royal Flying Corps No. 17 Squadron RFC, No. 19 Squadron RFC, Number 23 Squadron RFC, Number 30 Squadron RFC, Number 63 Squadron RFC, Number 72 Squadron RFC, Number 92 Squadron RFC, Uruguay United States Aviation Section, U.S. Signal Corps, United States Army Air Service 93rd Aero Squadron 103rd Aero Squadron, Yugoslavia Yugoslav Royal Air Force, post-war, survivors. SPAD S.VII is on display at the Virginia Aviation Museum. It was one of 19 British-made SPADs built in 1917 by MAN Egerton and Amp Co. Limited. It was fully restored in 1973. SPAD S.VII is on display at the National Museum of the United States Air Force in Dayton, Ohio. Restored and flown between 1962 to 1966, SPAD S.VII is on display at the Musée de l'Aéronautique near Paris, France, once flown by Georges Guynemer in World War I. SPAD S.VII, C.1 is on display at the San Diego Air and Amp Space Museum. Built at the MAN Egerton & Co. of Norwich, England in 1917, it was one of a batch shipped to the United States for use as a trainer. The aircraft is fully restored in 1990 and is 95% original. SPAD S.VII is on display at the Letecké Museum at Buli, a northeastern suburb of Prague, Czech Republic. Flown post-World War I in Czechoslovak Air Force, in the Západáčský Aeroklub. 2 SPAD S.VII are on display at the Italian Air Force Museum at Vigna di Vale. S.1531 once flown by Fulco Ruffo di Calabria and the one flown by Ernesto Cabruna in World War I. Specifications. Data from Sharp 2000, p. 269. General characteristics. Crew 1. Length 6.08 meters. Wingspan 7.81 meters. Height 2.20 meters. Wing area 17.85 square meters. Empty weight 510 kilograms. Max takeoff weight 740 kilograms. Power plant 1 times Hispano Suiza 8AA 90 degrees V8 engine 112 kilowatts. Performance maximum speed 192 kilometers per hour. Range 360 kilometers. Service ceiling 5,335 meters. Time to altitude 4.5 minutes to 2,000 meters. Armament 1X 303 cal. Vickers machine gun